All right, we are live. Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to episode 4 of 10 Scale Adventures. We're at the bench, and today we're going to be playing around a little bit with the Yota axles. Before I get into that, be sure to drop a message in the chat. Let me know where you're watching from. Yeah, so the plan today is to swap out a Yota 1 axle that is on this TF2 chassis, good old school Yota 1, for a more up-to-date Yota 2 axle, which I've got here, brand new in package. But not only are we going to do that, but we're also going to do a diff flip. So one thing you may know, if you've got a TF2 or if you have at least messed with them or used the Yota axles, either Yota 1 or 2, is the differential on these is on the passenger side, which for scale reasons, I'm not an expert for a lot of stuff that's where it is in full scale. And that's why they did that, I'm pretty sure. But if you actually look at the design of the chassis, that creates a huge problem for drive shaft clearance and drive shaft angles, because the transfer case on these, let me switch over here real quick. The transfer case on the Yota axles is a driver side drop transfer case. So by having a passenger side differential and a driver side drop, your drive line is actually crossing the chassis center line, which isn't ideal. And on this particular chassis doesn't really create a binding issue, but on a chassis that sits lower, if you've got something that you're chasing a little bit lower of a CG, or I'll pull this chassis out here in a second, it's done a little bit different, but it's also got a Yota 2 under it now, but it would have the same issue because of where that drive line is. And in the chassis sits lower, the drive line actually hits the bottom of the transmission, which limits travel and can also cause other issues in binding. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the Yota 2 swap, and I'm going to show you how to do a diff flip, because it's not as easy as just flipping the axle housing over. We can't do that because it'll affect the inclination angle. Hey, what's going on, Ethan? Thanks for checking in. It must be a Toyota thing. Yeah, it's got to be a Toyota thing. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we'll do is we'll rip this Yota 2 off or this Yota 1 axle off of this chassis and get it out so I can show you the difference between the two and how to identify them if you don't already know how to do that. So did anybody get out and do any trailing this weekend? The weather here in Oklahoma, at least yesterday, today's pretty nice too. Yesterday it was gorgeous out. So I managed to get out and do some running with the wife, and it was a good time. Today, pretty good weather, a little bit more gloomy. I didn't get out and actually run anything. But it wasn't bad. I avoided yard work, so that was an upside. Semi-truck and construction. I'm hoping you're talking scale semi-truck and not real semi-truck in construction. Because real semi-truck in construction, that sounds like work and not fun. So this flip that I'm going to do, it works for leaf springs or linked trucks. So either one, it'll work for them, and it'll help clean up your driveline angle. It'll also work without issue on, wow, I just lost it. Oh, the 1-speed or the 2-speed transmission for the TF2, the R2 and R3 transmissions. If you have an R4 transmission, which is the scale trans, that's a completely different setup. I mean, the flip would work for the axle, but it's not necessary for the clearance on that setup, because the R4, the transfer case is actually flipped over and mounted the other way, and the drop is on the passenger side. So the alignment is all good on that one. Almost got this axle out of here. Unfortunately, with the Yota 1, you can't do the diff flip that I'm about to do on the Yota 2. So if you've got Yota 1 axles, long story short, run them until they break and replace them with a different axle. If you're looking, if you're trying to stay with the scale axles, the Yota 2 looks even more scale than the Yota 1, because they adjusted the proportions on it, and we'll look at that here in a second. And then, but it's also just the Yota 2 is also a way better performing axle than the Yota 1. The Yota 1's just, they're weak and not worth it. So don't waste money on replacing a Yota 1. If you break a Yota 1, get a Yota 2. And it's a direct bolt-in swap to go from a Yota 1 to a Yota 2. No modifications required to your truck at all. Whether you're running leaf springs or a link conversion, all the mounting is exactly the same between the two. Oh, good, 1/14 scale. That makes me happy. I need to get a 1/14 scale semi. I don't know when or anything about actually working with those, but they do look like a lot of fun, so I could see enjoying that. I think I would want an old school cab over style if I did a semi. All right, so one of the things I am doing here, which for me I find extremely useful, is for all of these spots that I'm taking out hardware that I know is going to need to go right back in, I'm reconnecting the hardware where I have disconnected it, so that putting it back together will be less hardware searching, or particularly on the floor. We are going to pull the drive shaft. I looked at this for the K44s, Ethan, and it will not work. And I have one of those on hand too, and I will show you why it won't work with the K44s. It has to do with the way the housing is set up, unfortunately. I was hoping it could be done, but it won't work on the K44. So that is definitely a bummer, because I do like the open knuckle design of the K44. All right, we got shocks and steering links, and this will be off. Is Ethan, is Big Red still up and going? You still running that? I know you were looking at replacing the body with just a new replacement version of it to actually deck out more. Has that made any progress? Oh yeah, the K44 and the Yota 2. If you wanted to consider doing the axles, the diff flip that I'm about to do with the Yota 2, they're the same width. So I think the K44 touts that it has a couple more degrees of potential turning radius, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up, but I think that's really the only difference. As far as performance, the internals, the gear ratio, and the internals, I think are exactly the same parts between the K44 and the Yota 2. So that's no difference there. And the width is the same. So it would be a trade-off between the open knuckle and the closed knuckle style on the axle would be your biggest difference. But as far as for scale axles, I think both the K44 and the Yota II are both very good looking scale axles. Just pull this at the servo. 3.5 degrees turn radius difference. Yeah, that sounds about right. Well, is that Yota 2 and K44 or Yota 1 and K44? Because I know the Yota 1s have terrible turning radius. Oh, Panhard. Yeah, the open knuckle is, there is benefit to it for sure, especially for seeing what's going on. There's that, and depending on the build, the open knuckle for Big Red is much more scale correct, if I'm not mistaken. All right, last screw, and the Yota 1 is out. Now, for the Marlin Crawler is probably the #1 truck that I would say the diff flip is the one that anybody who's got a Marlin Crawler or a standard TF2 or a Galant, which comes as a 4-link with the R1 trans in it, those three are probably the #1 trucks that you're going to want to look at if you're looking for a little bit better upward suspension travel without binding, or to lower your CG a little bit. Those are the trucks that you're going to want to look at doing this this diff flip with, so that you can improve it. All right, so the front axle is out. We'll get the chassis out of the way because we're done with that until the Yota 2 is ready to go in. Let me grab my K44 real quick. Okay. There's K44 and the new Yota 2. And there's our new Yota 2. All right, so the Yota 1 and the Yota 2, we'll strip the Yota 2 real quick so that you can see it without the extras. Maybe. There it goes. The link kit that's on this setup is the RC 4-wheel drive conversion kit for a TF2. The front and the rear come as separate purchases. I don't have a link for those handy, but you can look them up real easy. But this is the RC 4-wheel drive link conversion for a TF2. Oh man, I'm gonna have to take the Panhard all the way off. Dang it. While I'm pulling these out, unfortunately, I didn't get to make it out to the event, but this weekend in Tulsa, which is about an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours from me, was the Superchips RC drag event, and that was a pretty big deal from what little coverage I've seen on it so far. I think there was over 100, 120 or something cars that were registered, and I saw a video clip of it, and it was a huge lineup of drag cars out there. That was probably a pretty cool event. I kind of wish I would have planned to have gone out to it since it was so close to go check it out. I mean, I know it's not scale trucks, but the RC drag thing is something that I think is pretty cool. I wouldn't mind getting one. I know Traxxas just released a new chassis, their new drag slash, which other than a few minor tweaks is no different than any drag racing slash based setup that people have been doing anyways, which I think is a 2-wheel drive slash chassis with bandit buggy arms or something like that. I haven't looked into it much, but the event looked like it would have probably been a cool event to go to. A lot bigger of an event than I expected it would be. Don't know who won. I'll have to look that up. All right. The link setup is out of the way. So those parts that I just took off will all be going on to, plus these. All these parts will be going straight onto the Yota II axle. And the only part that may need some adjustment is the Panhard and the steering link. And that's because the Yota II, it looks like the hip, I can't really say it's hip and arm, but the connecting arm at the knuckle might be a slightly different length, which is going to affect these. And the cross link between the knuckles, the drag link, it will run behind the axle. So I'll have to make sure that that doesn't bind with anything. And those are out of the way. All right, let's go to the close-up. All right, so there's your Yota 1 axle. Your Yota 1 axle has a casting line that runs down the center front of the case, and you have a top half and a bottom half. In this case, splits open that way, and you have a third member that bolts in from the back. So because this is all mounted this way, there's no way to actually take the third member out and put it in the other direction. Not only that, but with the way the knuckles are set up, you can't actually put anything on the other side of the knuckle, which is something that is doable with the Yota II. You have arms off the front and the back of the knuckle. You could take the knuckles and turn them around to the other side, but ultimately you still can't move the diff. Also inside on the Yota 1, we'll open the case real quick. If I had a little buzz driver, this would open up a lot quicker, but probably tear up some screws in the meantime. But it basically, what we're going to find in here, other than maybe some tore up gears. Actually, I think this axle was still running smooth. I don't think I tore this one up. Side note, if you're really chasing a performance driven axle, the Yota 1, the Yota 2, or the K44 are not your best choice. They're just not as tough as something like your AR44. That said, they're a lot narrower than your standard AR44s type axles. So if you tried comparing these with any of those and tucking your small tires in under your rig without having to extend your fenders or anything, you're going to run into a lot more issues with a wider axle. So, and it's a significant width difference, which we can look at and just after we pop this one open, show you how much wider because that's one of the things I know when you're looking for axles, you don't really think about width too much until you realize how wide your axles are if you're trying to do something like a Hilux and get the tires all the way tucked in for that scale look. There is a couple of options out there that do exist for custom narrowed AR44s, and you can narrow your own if you've got the ingenuity to do it. And there's also the BRX70 axles, which are AR44 type ring and pinion and axle tube design, but it's a lot narrower setup than a typical AR44. But those are kind of expensive too, so I've looked a couple of times at getting them, and the budget was well over $200 to get a pair of axles. So there we go. This is nice and gooped up. This axle actually looks pretty good. So we'll save those gears. All right. So if you look in here, there's enough light right there. The ring gear on this axle can only go in that one spot right where it's at. Now, if I open up the Yota II, which is going to need to be opened to be greased anyways, so we'll go ahead and do that. Get this Yota I yucked up and out of the way. I did look it up recently. If you're curious, the Yota I, the Yota II, I know for sure use the exact same internals. So that's just one reason to keep your Yota II axle around for parts. If you do this conversion, or if you convert from a Yota I to a Yota II, is your internals are identical. I'm not 100% that the internals are identical from the K44 to a Yota II, which we got one of those here. Ethan, so the K44, the reason you can't do the flip is this one's all gooped up. But I won't open this, because it's the same as the Yota II. So the K44, which you can tell just by looking at the case on the K44, where the ring gear's at right here, the ring gear can't be turned around the other way so that it's on the other side of the housing. That's the unique difference with the Yota II. So in the Yota II, which we'll have open momentarily. Oh yeah, these are all loose anyway. Gotta love new parts out of the box. Pre-assembled, and you have to take them apart. That's okay. It never hurts to take them apart, make sure everything's good before an install. Yeah. K44 can't be flipped. It's unfortunate. And it's one of the reasons why when I realized I could do this with a Yota II, is why I switched my K5 behind me to a Yota II. That K44 I was just showing you was the one that was on my K5 chassis. Yeah, man, I didn't look at it that close until just, I don't know, week and a half ago, when I was converting the K5 back to leaf springs all the way around. And because I've got multiple C1 chassis, I figured I would take the K5, which was the worst performing C1 type truck that I had. Not so much because of what it was. I actually took the chassis that was under it, converted it to 4-link, 3-link setup with that VFD TF2, and that's actually what's under the little Toyota now. The red one with the tan bed, or the red bed tan cab, which was all red. Anyway, that one has the old chassis from the K5, but it's all the full link setup. And then I took a different TF2 chassis and set it up all on leaf springs to make the K5 a more of a super scale type setup. It'll probably perform terrible, but that's okay. It'll be cool. So here we go. The Yota II is open. Now, when you look inside the Yota II, there's a huge cavity on the side of the ring gear. So because this cavity is here, this ring gear can actually be turned around the other way. And then we take the differential and put it in from the other side. And we then have flipped, at that point, we will have flipped the differential from being a passenger side diff to being a driver side diff. There is a little bit more to it than just that. So we'll go ahead and finish opening up this Yota II and setting it up for the swap. Looks like they actually did a decent job of putting some grease on here, which is nice, but it'll also make this a little bit messy. So if you roll the K44 over, will it go in reverse drive? But if you roll the rear to match, would that work? So you're talking about taking it from here and doing this with it, right? That's what you're talking about, Ethan? Oh wait, there's a little bit of lag between once the video goes out and comes back. Okay, other than that, lag wasn't too bad. Yes. Okay, so technically, if you did that with both axles, they would both drive the same way. So you wouldn't be changing your rotation direction as long as you did that with both axles. The downside that you would have with actually doing this though is you would take your inclination angle, which is tilted inboard at your kingpin, and you would be flipping your inclination angle the other way. So if I flip this directly over, now my inclination angle is going out. And this is going to make steering and everything very poor with your setup. The other downside that you'll have, which you probably can see now, is it takes your steering connections, your tie rod and drag link connection, and it puts it on the bottom side. That, if you took this knuckle and you tried flipping the knuckle, then it takes your caster angle and makes your caster angle really bad because these are not aligned vertically because of that inclination angle. And the last part that gets affected is it moves your leaf block from being on top of the axle to being on the bottom of the axle. Now with a block on here and stuff, that's probably the easiest thing to fix is getting the leaf back on top of the axle, because you could make a spacer that fits that. But the rest of this stuff with your inclination angle and your kingpins and your steering linkage, there's just no good way to fix that. Yeah, basically a no-no on the K44. It just doesn't, it's not going to work. If it was a shelf queen that never moved and you just needed it to be that way for looks, then sure, you could do it. But if you actually want it to function, you don't want to do that. So, all right. Last part. So now we're going to pull the diff cover off, which the Yota II diff cover. So one of the big differences between the Yota 1 and the Yota 2 is in the Yota 1, which is this guy right here, the diff cover on the front or the back side of the axle, depending on if it's a front or a rear, is just molded into the housing. It's cast with the housing and part of that, so you can't change it. On the Yota 2, the diff cover is actually a separate piece, and you can see it's actually notched for the ring gear. So that's one of the things that we'll have to address when we're putting this back together, is making sure that that fits properly. The diff cover is held on by 4 screws that are set inside the housing. That's how it's actually held on. And that's how they achieved the the clean look on the outside. It's 4 screws. Where's my light? Right there. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4 screws that hold this diff cover on from the inside. There's those little bolts. We'll go ahead and move those up there. So I added this this gray mat this week. To me, it looks, from what I can see on the video side of things, it looks easier and looks like I have better overall contrast for seeing stuff. Any feedback on what you guys think about that would be great to know if this is better than the tabletop surface I was working with, which you can see a little bit of right there over in this corner. Good old 1980s style tabletop. All right, so now that I've got the axle opened up to this point, in order to get the ring gear out, I actually have to pull the axle shafts out. So we got to pull the knuckles off, and then we can get the axle shafts out. Once those are out, we can get the ring gear out. You know, why they didn't mold a full round diff cover, I think it's mainly because the scale look. I think that there's some old, I can't even say which one it is. I don't know if this is actually an old Toyota style for the diff cover, or if it's like an old Defender style diff cover. But I think they were chasing a specific style with that diff cover. But at the same time, with it being a separate piece, they do make option diff covers that you can replace it with. So that's kind of nice. Something to keep in mind if you do a Yota II swap is, out of the box, brand new, Yota IIs come with the dog bone drive shafts in them, which are terrible. They won't, if you drive your truck, you'll break them. This is the weakest, worst part of this axle is these dog bones. They do make a CVD style replacement for them. So, and it actually, I may have to look it up. It may even be the exact one that comes in the K44, which is a bonus to the K44s. The K44 comes with a CVD shaft in it. Just don't turn and give it gas. Yeah, exactly. You mean don't give it gas at all and don't turn? Either way, those will be going away. I don't have replacements for them today, but replacing an axle shaft is pretty straightforward. So I don't think that you need to see that on here. A common wear part on these is this bushing right here where the kingpin screw goes. So when you put these together, make sure that this bushing is in there. It is a very important part for making sure your axle stays together and doesn't really tear stuff up. And then if these start to get sloppy, then you're definitely going to want to replace them. They're also kind of a pain in the neck to put in these housings because there's one top and bottom. But since I have them both out, they are different sizes. The top, which is this guy here, has got a longer shoulder on it than the bottom. And that does matter because the kingpin screw bottoms out on this piece so that it doesn't pinch the casing for the knuckle. The longer one goes in the top, which becomes self-evident when you look at this, is the thickness of the housing here is greater than the thickness of the housing here. So that's how you can, if they fall out and you're not sure, that's how you can tell is the bigger one goes on the side of the housing that's bigger. All right. So putting the first one in is pretty easy, but then you can't flip the housing over all the way, otherwise it falls back out. So putting the second one in is kind of a pain. There we go. Needle nose pliers for the win. If you put a dab of grease on those, that would actually help them stay in there a little bit better. All right. Once the knuckle's off, then the axle shaft just comes right out. The axle shafts are a different length from side to side, so keep that in mind. Actually, I think I could be wrong. Hold on, we'll find out. Pretty sure they're a different length because the diff's not in the center, but that might not be 100% true. Yeah, Ethan, you're spot on. Keep it clean and replace it often. As long as you keep those in good shape, usually the knuckles stay in good shape and keep working well. Knuckle 2 off. Yeah, axle shafts, definitely a different length. Obviously, the short one goes on the side that's closest to the differential. One thing to keep in mind so you don't go shoving on it the wrong way, which it won't do anything other than maybe make you frustrated, is the ring gear and carrier group only comes out one direction. So you can see it just flopped out that time when I flipped it over. And that has to do with the fact that the housing is backed right there. And it actually gives it a seat for the bearings. So pop that back out. And I got some grease on my new mats. I think there's going to be a lot of grease on these mats, but that's okay. Not make a mess. All right, now we put it back together with the housing driver side diff. Okay, so to do this, it would help if I knew which way I dropped that out. I know how to check. So my diff cover, nope, that won't work for me. There we go. All right, so if I look at this passenger side diff, and I've got this one set passenger side diff, the ring gear goes closest to the knuckle. So when I flip this around, it needs to be the same way. The ring gear needs to be closest to the knuckle. Hot tip, the ring gear goes closest to the knuckle. Which that should have been the direction it was in there. No, that wasn't. That should be, yeah. I don't know, we'll find out. If I put it in wrong, I'll know here in a minute. All right. Now that is in, the carrier or the diff cover is what goes on next, which the diff cover, if we're going driver side diff, which in the output shaft, wrong camera, here we go. Driver side diff with the output shaft going towards the camera away from me, then the diff cover would go on here. Oh no, that's the, that would be putting it back together the same way it was. So turn it around. Now the passenger side diff. So I gotta visualize it as I put it together. So the diff cover needs to go on my side. Which would go like that. Now the problem that we have here, I'm trying to figure out how best to show this. So when putting the diff cover on the opposite side, and remember we had the 4 bolts that hold the diff cover in. These 4 bolts dropped down in the housing. See if I can get it to where it'll show. Come on. There we go. Okay. So right here in the housing, in these corners, there's a relief. So you can see when I hopefully get a little closer. Ah, there we go. So you can see the head of that screw right there, and this one will go right there. They're flush to the housing so that the diff cover can actually seat. Now, when we flip this axle over to bolt, and the diff cover actually goes on that side of the housing, when we flip it over, there's no reliefs for those bolts to actually sit in. Right there. No, can't see it. Can't see it. I need another light. My light is not in a good spot. Holy cow. Where is it? There it is. Get the light just right. So you can see right here, that bolt is not flush to the housing. So I can't put my differential, my third member, can't go in now because of that bolt. So that does create an issue for us that will need to be solved. So we'll come back to that because that issue actually gets solved after the whole axle was put together. Now, again, I gotta visualize how it goes in. That's that way. So that's my driver's side. The differential towards me. There we go. And that's what happens. So because that carrier is retained from the other side, man, I am really winning here. Gotta make sure I put this in correctly. I promise I have done this a whole one time before. And it was just as confusing that time for me to do it. So we'll put a couple of screws in to keep the third member in place. So oh, you're saying the ring gear was in the middle. Right, okay. So the ring gear was in the middle originally. Oh, really? Interesting. That was something I thought the ring gear was set up the same way originally as the Yota 1, but I guess it was flipped, which if I was doing this on not live, I would have gone back and actually just looked at my recording to see where it was. But I believe I want it to the outside. Let's see. Nope, I want it to the middle, I think. Well, we'll find out. If I end up tanking this and having to take it back apart, then I have to take it back apart. So I think it can actually be run either way. Ring gear in the middle or ring gear on the outside, as long as they're the same front and rear. The biggest difference is it's going to change which side the pinion is cheated off to. So if you're running the Yota II front and rear, as long as they're set the same way, then you'll get the same rotation. If they're set opposite, then your rotation will be opposite. But I do know that with Yota IIs, if you're running a transfer case that has reversed outputs, which is something that is doable, and it gives you some anti-torque behaviors in the chassis by doing that, then you could set the axles up opposite of one another. All right. So now that the diff is in, it's just held in with a couple of screws. We'll finish putting more in once I'm certain I've got everything set right. The problem I had with the diff cover was those bolts from the inside couldn't go in from the inside of the diff. The solution for that is to not use the included diff cover, but is to use a replacement diff cover, which is great because the replacement diff cover actually gives you an option to get something that looks way nicer. Or, a little bit more scale attitude, I guess. This is the Rancho diff cover by RC 4-wheel drive for the Yota II axles. I've never actually installed one of these on anything, but the reason this will work is this diff cover, unlike the stock diff cover, the stock one, like I said earlier, gets bolted in from the inside through the housing. This replacement gets bolted in around the outside from the outside of the diff cover. So with that one out of the way, we can take this diff cover, we drop that guy on there, and now we can bolt the diff cover in from the outside. And this is the reason why I wanted the ring gear. I had to look at the other part to make sure that I was doing it right. Because if you put the ring gear the other direction, and they do have other diff cover options, but if I put the ring gear the other direction on front and rear, then my additional scale armor vanes reinforcements on my diff cover are going to be at the top of the axle and not the bottom of the axle where the rock sliding is going to take place. So that's what drives putting the diff cover on the direction that I'm putting it. So, and then we just take these guys, put a couple of them in. And there we have it. Now the differential on the Yota II is on the opposite side. Now you remember originally when we were looking at these to begin with, the differential was on the same side between the two axles. And now I've flipped it to the other side, and we just reassemble it with all the same parts, exactly how it, the rest of it all goes back together more or less the same way it was. The exception being the short drive shaft goes in from this side now, or the short axle shaft, and the long one goes in from the other side. Just like that, everything rotates. There's some light. Everything rotates with no binding, just as smooth as it was, as if nothing changed other than we flipped the whole housing. So that's your big trick. And then if we keep going on this, we will get this one reassembled. We'll put it in the chassis, and you'll be able to see how that aligns with the drive shaft and all that clearance. But I will cheat a little bit and come back to finishing the assembly on this one by grabbing the K5 chassis for those who want to just see what it looks like installed. The K5 chassis already got housing, a Yota II flipped housing or flipped differential underneath it on the leaf spring setup. So, before we grab that, for those who are curious about the width thing that we were talking about earlier, granted this is a rear axle, but you can see the width difference between a SCX10 width. This is an AR44 SCX10 type axle with an SSD housing conversion on it. And you can see how much wider that axle is compared to the K44, which is the same width within a millimeter or two of the Yota 1 and the Yota 2. Those are all pretty much the same width. And the SCX10 AR44 stuff is a lot wider. So just keep that in mind if you're looking at other axle options for your TF2, is how much wider an AR44 type swap is if you're going to go to that type of axle. It may impact your wheel selection, your tire clearances on your body, all that sort of stuff, especially if you're trying to stay within a SORCA regulation for like a class 1 rule set. All right. K5 chassis. Here we go. So, don't mind the fact that electronics haven't been resecured on this yet. I can get part of them out of the way, I think. That's kind of stuck in it. That doesn't matter. We can tolerate that, I guess. Four millimeters total and width difference between which axles, Ethan? Are you talking between the K44s and the Yota IIs, or because the AR45 is a lot wider? That's more than 4 millimeters wider than the. Oh, this has got a receiver in it too already. We'll just get that out of the way. And I thought I was going to have this truck together to run this weekend too. Not. Yeah, the K40, if I remember, AR44s are like 12 millimeters wider. Really? AR to K44? It's got to be more than 4 millimeters. There's no way that's only 4 millimeters between those. Now you're making me want to grab my ruler. If I could see it, I would grab it. I see it. All right. I remember right, the Yota 1, Yota 2s are like 178. Yeah, 170. We're looking at like just shy of 180 millimeters hex to hex on Yota 2. The AR44, looking at 190 hex to hex. Yeah, so it's like 12 millimeters hex to hex. And these are the same width hexes on this AR44 as that Yota 2. I don't have any oversized or undersized on either of these. It's like just shy of 190 millimeters face to face versus the 178. So yeah, I think it's like a 12 millimeter difference between the two. Yeah, K44 to Yota is only a couple millimeters. 1 or 2 here and there, depending on which hexes you run. But yeah, AR44 is a lot wider. So let me move this a little bit so I don't go knocking important stuff around. So here's the K5, and we're looking at it from underneath. If you hadn't guessed, and we have the differential. So if we remember right, take our Yota 1 axle, which would be this way. You can see the differential is on the opposite side of the chassis now from where a Yota 1 or originally the Yota 2, this is a Yota 2 on here. And now you can see that my drive line off of my Yota 2 comes straight down and has a very mild angle on it. Instead of coming across the chassis like it was before, it was coming across from here. You can see the Yota, if I took the wheels off, it'd be a lot easier to see that. So we'll put those off real quick. Since it's just one little nut. But does it clear the motor? Oh yeah, the drive shaft clears the motor, and there's another side effect that comes out of making this swap especially with the R3 or R2 and R3 scaled, or the side transmissions, the 1-speed and the 2-speed side mount transmissions that's on most of these trucks. There's another side effect of this swap. So let's see. Let me see if I can adjust the light a little bit so we can see this a little bit better. You come this way. And that looks like it might be a little more light. All right, that looks like that's about the best I'm going to get for tonight. I need to figure something else out for the light. So Yota II this way. There's how much different of a differential position you have between the two, which means that the original driveline angle was like this. You can see how much of a cross on the chassis that was, which is more aggressive on your U-joints, and it affects a whole lot of stuff. One of the common things that affects is, especially if you're trying to keep your chassis a little bit low and your weight low, is it affects your clearance of your drive shaft to your transmission. So now if we turn this way, you can see that my drive shaft is high enough that it actually passes by the side of the transmission. It's not going under the transmission at all. Granted, this truck has very little flex because it's a leaf spring truck with short travel shocks on it. But my drive shaft doesn't go under my transmission at all now, which gives me a ton of clearance in that region, right? Now, another common issue with these, when you have the differential on this passenger side, is that's where your servo's at. So my servo horn, which is, of course, it's black, so you can't really see it, but there's my servo horn right there. Typically, when you set these trucks down low, the top of the servo horn, where your steering linkage connects, hits the top of the differential, which limits how much it can travel there and causes binding in your steering. So that's another reason why the Marlins are lifted up as high as they are and have the amount of clearance that they have. One of the things I did on this chassis to get this one down low, and I was more so just chasing having this be a real scale truck and have it look appropriate, is I went to a leaf under. So from the factory, all your leaf trucks, the leaves go on top of the axle. I went to a leaf under. I whipped up a little block to put under the axle, so my screws now go up through my little block and bolt into the same pad as they would if the leaf was on top, but now it's leaf under, and that was to get this whole chassis to sit lower. And in the process of doing that is when I figured out that I could flip the Yota II axle around to actually create the clearances needed for all this to work. So super excited about that. We'll go ahead, and I have another diff cover for this axle because this is the one I actually got one for originally, and we'll put that on. It's the same exact Rancho cover though. It's not a different option. At the time when I ordered, I just ordered both of them at the same time, and it was the one that was in stock and readily available. So but yeah, so I wanted to show both the application on a link truck, which we'll get back to putting that one back together, and on a leaf spring setup, so that anybody who's curious can see that it works on both. And of course, it's got some teeny tiny little parts. This one I'll actually put just a tiny little dab of Loctite on this stuff as I put it together, because this one's already all been greased up and is ready to run, right? Yeah, it looks like this one's all greased up. Lots of good sticky stuff in there. All right, so this diff cover comes with this really neat super scale Rancho badge that I don't even know how to get out of the little blue plastic. There we go. I did put a link in the description for these diff covers if anybody wanted to go see one of them or figure out what it is they're looking for if they wanted to do this swap. It's an RPP link. Holy cow, I don't have do I have anything I can even put this screw in with? It's scale hardware. Teeny tiny scale hardware. I don't know, can you do that? Look at it. Can't even get the camera to focus. It's too small. Yep, that's a teeny tiny scale hardware bolt. Super cool. I don't have a tool for it though. We're going to try the old use another bolt trick. Oh, I wonder, are these the right size? Oh, I was saying they are. So, a trick for scale hardware is if you have scale hardware, you can find one of your other regular hex head bolts and use it as a driver. Granted, this one's a little short to try and get a hold of, but that's one way to, if you don't have the right tool for scale hardware, that is actually an effective tool for handling the scale hardware. That one's too big. And it looks like I'm going to have to use one of those small ones because I don't think I have anything else. Anything else is better. Next to the black bolt. Does it mess with the torque twist? To be completely honest, it shouldn't affect the torque twist at all. Not any more or any less. You're still putting the rotation into the axle the same direction it was originally. So the torque twist is probably going to be very similar. The geometry, you haven't really changed any geometry other than the drive shaft position. So that might, because the drive shafts and the drive shaft angle is so much better, it might have a little bit less torque twist because there's going to be less load up on the joints of the drive shaft. But I couldn't say for certain. I actually haven't run this yet because I didn't have a diff cover for it until just a couple days ago when this scale mail package showed up. So, I mean, hopefully it'll have less torque twist, but I can't promise that. I'm not 100% sure. Oh, is that what that little sleeve is? That's an adapter. Good eye. Yeah, sure enough. And I just thought that was a little sleeve. See, it's better to build something with other people hanging out. Ethan in the sharp eye on the video caught that this little kit came with an adapter so that you can use a regular hex driver. There it is. To install the scale hardware. And I'm showing this to a camera that's not on. There we go. There we go. Now you can see it. It came with a little adapter, back the driver out, that allows me to use my regular scale driver or my regular hex driver. Super cool. Of course, you have 4 of them. I don't have any of them, or if I did, I just totally misplaced them and wasn't paying any attention and just went to the old-fashioned bolt trick. All right. I definitely don't want these coming out, so we're going to Loctite them in. Because the hardware is so small, it only needs a tiny little bit of Loctite. And for those who are curious, the amount of Loctite you need on a bolt is, no more than that. I don't even know if this bolt's so small, it's not really focusing. It's just a little dab on the end of the bolt. You don't need to coat the whole thing or fill all the threads or any of that sort of stuff. That's just going to waste Loctite and make your life more difficult if you ever have to take that bolt out. Granted, I don't ever plan on taking these out, but it's just not necessary to use an excessive amount of Loctite. There we go. It took you 2 covers to find out. It's probably how long it would have taken me to figure that out. Maybe more, just because I would have just automatically assumed I had to do it the hard way. Is it a directional fit thing here? Seems like it's slipping. Oh, scale hardware starting to fail me already. Oh man, you know, I don't want them out. Never. Bash it until they're done. So this little adapter is actually kind of terrible. I mean, good idea, but terrible. It's already not driving those in. Or that hole's just not drilled out all the way. Oh no, it is. Reverting to the to my method. Bolt head. All right, there we go. The Rancho diff cover is in. Well, the diff cover logo. And not gonna lie, that actually looks pretty sharp. I don't even know if I can. Definitely gonna have a nice scale look to it once it's on the truck. So let's get it on the truck. See if I can do this in a way that I can actually see what I'm doing. And no, these are just too small. So I will try and buzz this real quick. This guy. Again, I'm also going to use a dab of Loctite on these just because they're going into a metal housing. And hopefully this is going to stay on here for a good long time before I have to take it out, because you don't have to actually take the diff cover off to do repairs internally. You just pull the third member. Actually, is that 100% true now? No, if I have to replace the ring gear, the diff cover will have to come off because the ring gear's in from the other side of the carrier. So, you remember originally when we looked at the other axle, the ring gear bearing seats fit one way and not the other. So if that was the way it's set up from the factory, you can pull the third member and the axles, and the ring gear comes out without having to take the diff cover off. But now that since we've turned that all around and put everything in from the opposite side, the ring gear has to come out through the diff cover side of the axle. So that means if we blow a diff cover, all these bolts have to come out. The good thing I only use a little bit of blue Loctite, just enough to keep vibration from backing these off. And worst case, if they ever do get to the point that they don't want to back out because of the Loctite, you just heat them up. Metal housings, all metal in there, no plastic anywhere. Take a soldering iron to the head of the bolt, get it nice and hot, and then hit it with an Allen wrench and it should back right off. Good quality hex drivers, i.e. drivers like these MIPs, are a must. They will also save your bolts and help you get stuff apart that's put together nice and tight. Now, it was a lot easier to install the stock diff cover. if I could have put that back on, it might have been worth putting on to save time because it was only 4 bolts. Whereas this diff cover is, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 bolts. The 10 bolts to put this diff cover on versus the stock 4 bolts. But this definitely has a way better look. And the driveline angle correction, the clearance on the transmission, and the clearance on the servo horn, all well worth the 6 extra bolts to accomplish this. All right, almost there. It even has a drain plug. Actually, it would be more of a fill line for the differential. They should have used scale hardware for that, not just a little tiny grub screw. One thing I am doing, which is always good practice, especially more so with the third member than the diff cover, is to put all the bolts in just barely snug before you actually tighten everything down. That'll make sure everything's actually aligned properly before you actually start cinching it all together. That one's a little heavy. There we go. That's the last bolt going in. Again, these aren't all that big of a screw, so they don't need to be too tight. Just a good cinch on those, especially since we put a little bit of Loctite to counteract the vibration. And it always helps too, especially with aluminum or anything that's circular bolt pattern, to kind of tighten in a star type pattern going back and forth across the differential or the wheel. That way it seats everything nice and even and flat across the assembly and not just really tight on one side and warping it around to the other. And then once I think I've gotten all of them on there, I'll go just one quick loop around the outside to make sure I didn't miss any or skip any, and then call it good. And I'll be able to actually finish up the electronics and take this truck out and do some scale driving with my leaf under K5. Find out just how terrible it performs, or maybe pleasantly surprised. And last, the little grub screw that goes into the fill port. Oh, too much. There we go. Which I can't even see. There it is. And a quick spin. Spins free. All right. Flip that up. And there it is. Can I? Oh, we're going to go back to the other camera. There we go. There's the driver side diff on a leaf sprung Yota II axle. Cleaning up the you can see now, ignore the fact that the electronics on this are only partially mounted or not mounted. The drive shaft now runs right here on the driver's side of the chassis, opposite the transmission, giving me lots of clearance on all that. All going to be much happier throughout the stroke of the suspension. Even more so on the linked truck, which we'll go ahead and finish putting that other Yota II together and see if we can get that one under the link truck, and it'll really exaggerate how much more clearance there is, because that on the link truck, it can actually, the drive shaft actually hit the transmission, and that was a limiting factor into travel on the axle. Little teeny tiny rock beast back on here. Probably too good of a tire for this truck, to be honest, but that's okay. It's a K5. It'll probably surprise me how well it works. Ground clearance might be an issue, but it does have the low profile transfer case skid under it, which is still not super low profile, but it's better than the shovel. There we go. That's on there. Yeah. K5. Not quite fully mounted yet. I actually got to adjust the rear bumper position. The back of this doesn't quite sit right, but there's a look at it from the side. You can see I wanted to go for that nice low profile look. Tires fit to the fender, very stock truck type look here. And now that it's got a really good looking differential under the front of it, it really steps up that scale look, not to mention fixes some of the clearance issues. I won't fight to get this back on the jack stands right now. Just put it back on the shelf and we'll move back to the link truck. Food time and mama is calling. Well, then you better get to mama. I mean, food, I would tell you to wait, but can't ever tell mama to wait. So thanks for dropping in, man. I appreciate it. We'll see you around on the next one. If you have any questions or suggestions on things you'd like to see done, just hit me up. Let me know. You also got to start sharing some pictures with Red out on the trail. Just saying. I haven't seen pictures in a while anywhere. All right, moving on. We're going to go ahead and put this back together. One of the things I can do so that that differential stays in place while I've got the diff cover off is I can put the axle shafts in and put the knuckles on, and that'll stay in place. Again, the knuckles for the Yota II are identical from one side to the other. Unlike the Yota I, they're actually a mirror. So RC four-wheel drive, not only did they improve the overall axle design by doing the front and rear tabs on the knuckle, but they also improved their production cost on these by doing that, because the knuckles become universal, so they only have to make one piece to go in two places instead of two separate pieces, which would make you think it would drive the cost down, but of course not. They don't want us to think like that. Typically you want to put a little bit of Loctite on these screws that go into the kingpin to hold the knuckle in just a little bit. But I'm not going to do that right now, because these will have to come back off to get the axle shafts replaced in the very near future, maybe even before it sees the trail again. So I'm not going to Loctite these, but I am going to put a decent cinch on them just in case I forget and it goes out before the axles get replaced. There we go. Yeah, remember those little bushings have to be in there. And they're kind of a pain to deal with. So when you're assembling this, keep those bushings in. You want to hold it where it's in this kind of position. Switch. So hold it so it's in, so the little arms, put my axle shaft back in where it goes. There we go. Hold it so that the little arms on the knuckle are vertical, up and down. That'll help keep your bushings sitting in the little spots where they're at. Again, if you're really having a hard time with keeping those in there, a dab of grease on the outside of those, just a touch of it might help keep it together. But if you hold it vertical, then they'll stay just fine. And once it's slid on, as long as you don't slide it back off, they'll stay in place. But remember, those shoulders go to the inside. So those have to be put on from the inside of the housing. Right. One more screw there. Again, just a decent little cinch on there. I just saw Ethan's comment about 98 foot-pounds. I don't remember. Not sure. I'll have to watch the playback of the video to see when exactly he said that to know which part I was working on. But whatever it was something I said not to over tighten. So 98 foot-pounds sounds just about perfect. So I'm pulling this diff cover back off so that I can put some grease in here. And then we can actually assemble this diff cover with all the proper stuff. Actually, this has a reasonable amount of the red tacky stuff on it, so we'll go with that for now. So one of the things I am going to look at is I'm going to pinch the ring gear with my thumb so that the ring gear can't move, and I'm going to wiggle my input shaft. The slop in the input shaft it's not bad, but this one we are going to put a shim in. There's a little bit more thrust movement on here than I would like. So thrust movement is not ideal. That's going to cause improper wear on your ring and pinion and cause it to go out early. So what I'm going to do, which means I got to pull one of the knuckles back off. Oh no, I can pull the third member out. I only got 2 bolts on it. I'm going to pull the third member out, drop the ring gear, the pinion out of it, and put a shim on the inside, on the back of the pinion to eliminate a little bit of that thrust movement, the in and out movement, and keep that to where it's seated nice and even. But doing that will make your gears live longer, especially under high use or a higher output motor. It'll really make a difference. Make sure I keep my hardware separated. So yeah, there we go. The third member is out. There's a good bit of the red sticky stuff in there too. We'll try not to make too much of a mess doing this. And I need shims. No, 0.2 is probably too much. It's the wrong size. 0.1 millimeter. We're going to go with a 0.1. So here's what I'm going to put in here. I'm going to put a 0.1 millimeter shim, which looks an awful lot like a washer, except it's exactly 0.1 millimeter thick. We're going to put one of those in behind the ring gear and then see what the thrust movement feels like then. Doing that, we'll have to pop the E-clip or the Jeebus clip. Hopefully we don't send it across the room. Doing this is always a pain. I obviously don't have a perfect tool for this. I'm not sure that one exists. Even the few tools I've used designed for it are a pain in the neck. There we go. That wasn't too bad. Didn't send it flying across the room. Success. And then the pinion gear. So we'll just bring the pinion gear out. Now it brought one of the tail housing bearings out with it, and I don't want the shim behind that bearing because then it won't do anything for us. So drop that in there. Open this. I got enough sticky on my finger to grab a shim just by touching. And then the shim just goes on the shaft, the output shaft. It's a 5mm ID bearing shim is what this is. If you use Trailfinder 2s, if you have Yota 1s, Yota 2s, K44s, I highly recommend a bearing shim kit so that you can shim your input shafts properly. They're usually too sloppy on all those axles when they come from the factory. Almost all of them have too much slop in them. And that's just because cast housings, they can't run the tolerance. You just can't have that high of a tolerance in a casting without machining it afterwards. And well, I mean, let's be honest, these axles are really cheap compared to nicely machined axles or CNC machined axles. That's the big difference. Machined axles, you can get a lot higher tolerance, which makes them a lot stronger and usually out of better material than you can get with any sort of casting. So now that we've got that shim on there, we put our Jeebus or our E-clip back in. There we go. Try not to stab yourself doing that. I've done that plenty of times in the past and it really hurts. Fortunately, we didn't have that problem today. All right. So yeah, now I have about half as much, probably about half as much thrust movement. I could grab a, if I would have grabbed calipers beforehand, I might have been able to figure out a way to measure that. But you don't want that to be super tight because you don't want constant thrust or constant pinching pressure on the bearings. That'll cause the bearings to fail. But you do want very minimal movement right there on your pinion. And then we'll drop the housing third member back in. I'm going to put 4 bolts in it to start with just a little bit of a cinch to them. And if that, give it a spin and make sure everything feels good. If that feels good, then we'll go ahead and put all the bolts in with a little bit, just a touch of Loctite on. Again, anytime it's a metal to metal connection, I use just a touch of Loctite to counteract vibration, making stuff come loose. It's never fun, especially on stuff like this with gears. If this third member were to start coming loose, not only would it be annoying to have lost the bolts and have to get replacement bolts, but it would also be super annoying in the fact that it could tear up the bearings and destroy the ring and pinion gears. And if you have to replace all the bearings and the ring and pinion gear, you might as well just buy a new axle. And nobody likes having to buy new axles unless it's an upgrade. But when you're replacing parts because something broke, that's not ideal. It's never fun. It happens, but never fun. So, okay, I'll do the same thing. I'll put a little side pressure on the ring gear so it doesn't move. And then just slightly see how much play is in the pinion. And it's, just a little bit of play. It should wiggle just a little bit. You don't want those gears overly too close together. A little bit of play is good. And the thrust movement is less, it's an acceptable amount. We reduced it by 0.1 millimeters, which is going to help keep that engagement nice and even. It might adding another 0.05 shim or even another 0.1 to get it up to a 0.15 or 0.2 millimeter total shim might be doable on this, but it feels pretty good where it's at, so we're gonna stay with it. Now let's back those out, put a little bit of Loctite on them, and finish the assembly of the axle. There we go. Man, it's kind of warm in my room. Could kind of use some cool air. All right. Time to touch them all with a little Loctite. Again, the process you want to use here, putting these all in, is just a skosh of Loctite, enough to actually just barely notice there's something on there. And you want to put all these in a little loose, you know, just barely to where they start to get to the point where you're going to actually tighten them. Put them all in, and then go back and tighten them in a star pattern. Work your way around, get them all tightened nice and even, going back and forth across the center line. That'll help keep everything centered and tightened even so that it all seats in good. Especially with cast parts, if you actually try and force something together from one side to the other, you increase the probability of cracking the part. I can't say I've ever tightened anything enough in my RC stuff to crack a part, but I have seen it happen in bigger stuff where a lot more torque is being applied. And that's because it just applies the pressure uneven across a part, and then a stress fracture occurs. And that's never good. Side note, while I'm putting all these in, this order that came with the parts to do this also included the next set of parts for the 1K giveaway build. Yep, I got the first round of upgrades for that. So next week, will be some more work on that truck. I'm not going to spoil what I got for it, because that would defeat the purpose altogether of doing the video. But yeah, next week we'll be working on the 1K giveaway truck. I think the part choice was, I'm pretty happy with it. I know I would do it. Well, I'm probably going to want to keep this truck, but I won't. I promise. It'll be a giveaway at 1,000 subscribers, and it may pain me to do it, but I am going to give it away regardless of what's into it by that point. I mean, if it takes, depending on how long it takes, that truck could be, you know, worth entirely too much, but that's what's going to make it cool and make it a fun build. Still haven't decided on a body for it though. I've got a couple of ideas in mind. Definitely going to be a hard body. Probably a C1 build. I think because it's going to be a giveaway, and I can't begin to even guess who it'll go to or where it'll go, I think I'm going to stay with doing it out as a 12.3 wheelbase, and try to stay with mostly common, readily available parts that can be replaced in case it goes to somebody who doesn't have the means, for whatever reason, of excessive custom fabrication. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm not going to do some custom work for it, because I want it to have some custom work, and it may need some custom work depending on what body I actually get. But as far as the chassis and the suspension components, I think doing a 12.3 wheelbase is the wise choice, just so it's not something that's impossible to find a replacement part for if a link gets wasted or something like that. It will come. I will be doing building links for it. I'm not going to just buy a set of 12.3 links. But I think it'll be cooler for it to have a custom set of links. I've also been thinking about exploring doing my own anodizing, but that seems a bit sketchy. So, okay, I've got all 10 bolts in for the third member. Now we're going to go through in a star pattern. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'll put a little bit of a cinch on that one, and I'll go straight to the bottom, put a little bit of cinch on that one, come over to the side, and then I will work over one bolt and run the same pattern from there. Oh, this one here. And shift one more. At this point, I've touched all of them, so I will just go around just to make sure none were missed. Again, I tend to do this in a kind of a skipping, alternating pattern. It just makes sure that everything gets tightened good and tight. And then once I'm pretty sure, I may just go every single one just as a final sanity check. There we go. Now all those are good and tight. We got to do the diff cover. I think that one needs to go away sooner than later. Don't need any misleading evidence around in the hobby room. I promise it was 4 screws, not Coke. My Coke is in a bottle. Little Rancho logo out. All right. And the scale hardware. Well, again, I need a tiny little bit of Loctite. We'll try one more time to use the little adapter that it came with and see if this one works better. Man, that is so small. Super cool, but so small. Scotia Loctite on those. Oh, just a heads up. That Rancho logo can go in right side up or upside down. So be sure when you put it in there, be sure you put it in the right way, because that would be a bummer. Especially if you didn't notice it right away and you had to deal with getting it back out after the Loctite seats on these. That one went in nice and easy. Oh. Then again, you know, you could put it in upside down intentionally, because the assumption there would be that more often than not, when people actually noticeably see the diff cover and know there's a logo, there's a logo on it, the truck's probably upside down. and then it would read the right way. That's actually, you know, that could be an intentional thought process. I'm going to put them in the right way. I don't want it upside down. Although the thought process was solid. This little adapter worked much better than the other one. It was with the other diff cover. Maybe that one. Nope, that one already. This one just slipped. Man, those are weak little things. I mean, they work. If you're in a pinch, it'll work, but using the head of a bolt, much more effective. There we go. Bam. Done. Rancho logo is in. Now we put the diff cover on. Man, it is a sharp looking diff cover. I'm not gonna lie. The machine work, that's actually a machined aluminum part, and it looks good. I mean, I don't know if the video is doing it any justice, but I think it looks pretty good. I'm very pleased with it. Not exactly a cheap part. It's like 28 bucks for that diff cover, 24 bucks, something like that. Not you know, not super cheap, but then again, none of the cool stuff is. It just has that extra scale edge to it. It looks way better than the stock diff cover. So many small screws. If you're watching this on playback right now, you're not watching live. If you're watching on playback, once this is actually posted, I would say there's a good chance you could probably skip forward about, I don't know, 5 minutes at least for me to get all these screws actually in and cinched. I can try and make small talk, but right at the moment I'm pretty much just talking to myself. Not really any activity on the chat. See, says that there's 2 viewers right now. So if you're out there viewing, I hope I'm not totally killing you. Trying not to be too terribly boring, but these screws are lacking excitement. You know what I mean? Tiny screws, touch a Loctite, put it in. Tiny screw, touch a Loctite, put it in. Wash, rinse, repeat. Wash, rinse, repeat. And we're down to 3 more to put in, and then we tighten them. Finally move on to rebuilding the links. If only there was a way to put on, you know, a little bit of elevator music. This is like a perfect elevator music time. Just I may have to look into that. I know that there's plenty of basic music that you can use on YouTube without copyright issues. It's just a matter of how to actually do it in a live stream. But that's for another time. We're on to the last bolt. It's got to go before I can tighten them all in. And then we'll put this in real quick too. This little grub screw serves as a mark, kind of just a scale touch for where a fill port would be on a real diff cover. So that goes right there. So yeah, that little grub screw just goes in right there, and it's just a scale touch for where a fill port would be on a real diff cover. Because the way that works on 1-to-1s is after you've drained the rear end, if you're putting fresh oil in, you put it in through the fill port, and usually, in most cases, you fill the differential. You continue filling the differential until the diff oil starts to weep back out of the fill port. So basically, it acts as a fill line. That's the typical way that it's done. Not always, but typical. The simple, effective way. No dipsticks needed. You just go until it weeps out the fill port. The only dipstick here is me. All right. Almost got all these cinched in. Way around the circle, one full loop just to make sure I didn't miss any. There we go. All right, there it is. Again, that is a driver side differential Yota II. Remember, Yota 1s and Yota 2s, or Yota 2s like Yota 1s, come set up as a passenger side differential. So this is now a driver side differential Yota 2. It's doable. Everything works. Everything spins. We've done 2 of them now. Let's put the 4-link setup back onto this one. So the 4-link setup, if you haven't seen one before, again, this is a kit from RC 4-Wheel Drive. It comes with, for the front, it comes with this arm here, and it comes with this arm here. In a standard setup, the Panhard Mount arm goes on the driver's side, and the non-Panhard Mount arm goes on the passenger side. And that's because on the TF2, the Panhard Mount, which is included with the front 4-link setup, well, I can show you that on the chassis. It's still attached because the other half of the Panhard mounts to the frame rail of the chassis. But it goes on the passenger side of the chassis. That guy will go on right there. And this one, initially, when installing these, I start with just the countersink screws that I have apparently misplaced one of. Oh, nope, that's not it. Oh no, I seem to have lost a screw. It's not still in the housing. How did I do that? Man, that's impressive. Well, it's a good thing I have more of those. And I forgot to put Loctite on this one. For these screws, these are M3s. You definitely want to put a touch of Loctite on these when you install them. Just a touch. Enough to help counteract that vibration. Again, there's a lot, even if you're driving your truck as a true scale truck, there's a good bit of vibration in all these parts. And that vibration can very easily make all this stuff come loose. And when stuff starts coming loose, that's when you start really wearing hard on parts or breaking parts. And it'll also make your truck drive terrible. So we can't cinch that in just yet, but we can. Can't reach. There we go. Fortunately, I have a whole kit of screws, so we can solve the fact that one of them has magically vanished. Probably attached to, stuck to something else around here. There. I think that's about the right length. Right now I'm just seeing if I got the right length of screw. Yep, I did. The other one was a little short. That's right. It'll be fine. Touch of Loctite. Again, even for these, when you're doing a little bit of Loctite, it's literally just a little bit. It's all you need. As it goes down in the threads, it gets squeezed all down nice and thin between the threads and just soaks up all the little extra space to keep them from coming loose. And it does. It just takes just a touch. All right. So the reason you put these in a little bit loose at first is you still have to put the cross member on, the top cross member, and it'll go in across just like that and bolt into the other two holes. So before we tighten any of that down, that gets that screw. We need to put a little bit of Loctite on these, get this in, and then make sure everything lines up nice and square and cinch it all together. There is a kit from Asia Tees. I don't remember if it's actually a Boom Racing brand. I think it might be a Boom Racing brand, but it's a low profile cross member. And I have it on the tan cab red bed Toyota. It's on the axles that are on there, but those aren't Yota 2s. But it has way more clearance. This top cross member is on those axles, which are very similar. The top cross member actually goes around the front of the pumpkin instead of over the top, and has a lot more clearance on top, allowing the axle to seat up in the frame rails a whole lot better and have better up travel. I'll have to test fit and see if that kit will fit onto the Yota 2 with the differential flipped, because the axle I have on that truck is a driver's side diff axle. So I know that cross member won't work for a passenger side differential. There we go. Cinch these up. But it definitely improves the overall clearance of everything above the axle, and it flat out looks better. It's a machined aluminum part, so the durability on it's been great. So I've been really happy with that. I'll have to find out if that'll work on the flipped Yota. That would be a nice upgrade for this. Okay, that's on. Oh, the steering. So previously on our Yota II or our Yota 1, our steering link was here on the front. Yeah, underneath. Oh, I can't hold it all at one time. There we go. Our steering link was on the front like this. I don't want to run it on the front, but one of the big perks of the Yota 2 is being able to run it across the rear. I don't know if this link is going to work for that. I may have to get a different link, but we're going to try. So I definitely can't run it under, not this one anyways. I need a link that's got bends in it. And I can't run it over because it would interfere with the upper link, suspension link. So I need something that's got a bend in it to go over the differential. I wonder if I have anything that will work. I don't think any of my links have those kind of bends. Nope. Well, that's a bummer. There is a link. So let me grab the K5 real quick. I'm missing an important link to complete this. So unfortunately, that link is not included with the Yota II axle. That would have been fantastic if they would have included the fancy bent link that's needed to really make this work right. I guess when you're buying a replacement part, the assumption is that you have the link on your kit already that you're replacing it with. So let's see if I can get this so you can see what that link looks like. Get the way. And we see it. No, can't see it that way. You can kind of see it. Okay. So you can see right. Oh, let me go to the other side. Right here. So this is the steering link that goes from here to here across the back. And you can see right here, there's a bend. You can see where the light's reflecting off of it. There's a bend in it that changes the direction. So it mounts to the bottom of the arm coming off the knuckle. And then it bends up towards the frame rails to go over and clear all the differential, and then comes back down and attaches to the bottom of the knuckle on the other side. And that gives all the clearance needed for it to pass through on the backside. So I'm going to have to get one of those or find something that'll work. Definitely kind of annoying. That puts me one step further away from having the truck actually complete and ready to run again. But if I can't find something on hand that'll work, it'll just give me a reason to actually get the replacement CVD style axles ordered as well, since that's something that'll still need to be done. So we will move on without putting that on at this point. We will put the Panhard on. Which, if I'm not mistaken, should go this way. Come to find out, when I put this together, it probably goes the other way. No, it definitely goes this way. One of the things I like to do on these where there's room that won't create an interference issue on anything is I'll run a longer M3 on there. This post right here is threaded. But it being aluminum and being that you can't just replace this post, I don't like running the risk of stripping that thread. So what I'll do is I'll run a longer M3 screw on there, and I won't put Loctite on it. I will back it, which this screw is actually much longer than needed. I could probably put a shorter one in. But I will back it with a nylock nut. So that way I don't have to run Loctite, And nylock nuts are really cheap and easy to replace. Oh, being threaded, I gotta do this. This one's definitely much longer than needed. Let's replace that real quick. Let's put something in that's more appropriate. I'm sure I've got something appropriate. That looks like it might be better. Oh, that's gonna be a touch too short. Maybe I don't have something appropriate right here in the waste bin. Is that gonna be? Yeah. All right, we're just gonna tighten it up with this. When I take it apart next time, I will swap that out. That way, not wasting your time just digging in a hardware bin, because my hardware is currently not very well organized. I need to work on that. So what happens when I work on stuff? I take it apart. This one's not too grossly over length. Only too long by like 5 millimeters. So now with it cinched up on the back side with a nylock nut, I don't have to use any Loctite on this aluminum piece that I can't just buy a replacement for. So that's why I do that. It's just, I'm a weirdo. Not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong. It's just my way. That's all steering link stuff, so we'll leave that there. We can put and we'll wait to put the drive shaft on until it's on the chassis. So this is ready to go back under the truck now. And we will flip the links up out of the way. So here's right here, kind of hard to see, but right here, this is the Panhard mount. This little piece, it bolts in right here and right here on either side of this brace. That's the Panhard mount that's included with the link kit for the front of a TF2. And that's the first thing we're going to attach. I wish that it was possible to buy just this Panhard mount separate, because there's been a few times where I would have used it on other projects if I could get one, but unfortunately they don't, at least from what I can find, they don't sell it as an individual piece. So that's kind of a bummer. But again, this is the same scenario where it's a threaded piece. I don't use Loctite on it. I back it with a nylock nut because I don't want it to stay in good shape, because I prefer, I mean, I guess if it's stripped, it wouldn't be the end of the world, because then you would just have to put a nylock on the back of it. So I guess I'm just working towards, the inevitable eventually. But not using any Loctite on it will help maintain its integrity. Get that little Craftsman in there. There we go. That's in place. We start with the upper link. The upper link is the same way. It's a threaded post. Again, I back it with a nylock instead of using Loctite. Just the way I am. I can't explain it. Just the way I am. But my parts last a long time. I don't break them. And I don't strip hardware very often. part of that's good tools. Part of it is not over tightening things or grossly overusing Loctite. Some of it's luck. Unfortunately, this is at a slight bit of an angle, so I can't quite get my MIP driver in there. That's one of the downsides to just straight drivers. So if you or when you get a set of straight drivers, don't toss out your regular bent wrenches or your ball end wrenches, because you're gonna need them, just not as often. There we go. Now the lowers. The one thing that this might do with the stock drive shaft that's in the K5 on that chassis, that's a stock RC four-wheel drive shaft. This one is not. This is an SSD universal drive shaft, which they're my go-to for replacement drive shafts. I really like the SSD drive shafts, but it might create a length issue for me. I'm not sure that this one actually collapses far enough, and since we've shortened up by changing the pinion angle position, moving it from one side to the other, we've actually made the length of the required drive shaft shorter, which means that this drive shaft may not actually fit, because it was close to being bottomed out before. So typically I would put a little bit of Loctite on this, keep it in there, but we're not going to right now. I'm not even going to tighten it all the way, because we may have to pull it right back out. We shall see. It will depend on if it sits on the bottom of the drive shaft or not. And if it does sit on the bottom of the drive shaft, one of the nice things with the steel SSD drive shafts is I can, oh yeah, we're definitely bottomed out on the drive shaft. I can take the grinder to it and actually cut it down a little bit and make it, 1/4 inch shorter, and problem solved. But what you can see here, let's see if I can turn it, is I've got this link connected at the lower, and you can see that this link, you kind of can't really see it because everything's black, but this link here is not even reaching the mount by 5 millimeters or so, and that's because the drive shaft won't go any shorter. So this drive shaft was barely short enough to work with the diff on the other side, and when it was going across angle on the chassis, now it's too short with it being where it's supposed to be. But you can see how much better already the drive shaft angle is for clearance on everything. So, and you can see that now my servo horn is not above where my diff housing is. So I have lots of clearance for where that servo horn goes. Pretty nice. Pretty dang nice. Actually, I might be able to swap drive shafts front to rear, because, in my typical fashion, this does not have matching drive shafts. It has got a completely different, much older drive shaft in the rear that might be short enough to work in the front. My luck is then the SSD one won't fit in the rear, but we will find out right now. Because why not? Go. The skid that is on this truck, if you were curious, because you probably noticed that this does not have a shovel skid on it. It's a skid by Boom Racing, and it's a Darylin plastic and much smaller, much lower profile than the the stock skid. Oh yeah, this drive shaft will certainly work in the front, but that SSD probably won't work in the rear. You can see how much different in length they are. These where you can see them. So yeah, you can see the SSD is notably, the other way you will see it better. There we go. You can see how much longer the SSD is. It's probably 3/8 of an inch, almost ½ inch longer. But what I can do is I can take a little bit of meat off the end of it right here, and possibly, let's see, how far in does that go? Yeah, and take just a little bit off the housing right here with a grinder, and then it'll make this whole drive shaft shorter. So that's a solvable problem. In the meantime, we'll throw this shorter one in the front, and so you can see what it actually looks like with everything bolted together. Get this one in. Come on, line up. Oh, I need something smaller. Right now I'm just getting the drive shaft pin lined up with where it needs to go. And unless I'm crazy, which I might be, it doesn't want to go in. Oh, maybe I'm trying to put it in the wrong side. Yeah, so I was trying to put it in from the wrong direction, and on a lot of these drive shafts, the drive shaft pin only goes in from one side. Oh yeah, look at that, it dropped right in. And that's because one end of the drive shaft pin is threaded and the other end is a smaller diameter and just a pin. So I was trying to put it in on the wrong side where the threads weren't, so it wasn't fitting. That makes perfect sense. There we go. Turn that. Oh yeah, this should work up here for sure. There's enough pull on that. Pin in. I put that one in from the right way the first time. And typically, I like I said, I would Loctite these. I'm not going to do that yet. I'll probably end up pulling these out. I may even get new drive shafts for this truck since I'm doing all this new stuff. These ones are pretty beat up. No, that's not the right size. So, especially that one that I just put in, it's seen a lot of trail time on it. The joints are kind of sloppy, so it's probably due for a replacement at this point. There we go. So now with the axle in and attached to all the links, you can see that the drive shaft now has no clearance issues with the transmission, which this transmission even has rub marks on it. You can see where it's shiny right there. That's from the drive shaft hitting the transmission case. So that problem is solved. And to the extent that, the Panhard bar, which if I change the rod end at this end of the Panhard bar to an offset rod end, this axle will go all the way up until it hits the chassis cross member now without having any other binding on either servo horn or transmission or drive shaft. None of that will bind now all the way up until the chassis housing. So, and then if I went one step further and replaced this huge cross member, if I can replace this with the with the boom racing style, or I think it's boom racing, but with the low profile style cross member, then that axle will really sit in there really nice, and make everything fit together really well. So let's go ahead. I will go ahead and finish attaching the suspension, which I left that hardware attached to the other axle so it would stay together. Because one of the things you do need, if you're not running a spacer between your shock and the shock mounts on Yota style axles or K44s, if you're using the shock mount tabs that are on there, you have to use a spacer, otherwise your shock is going to bind. I have about 3 to 4 millimeters worth of spacer on there. That's what works well for me. Should probably put a dab of Loctite on that. Yeah, I'm here. We'll do it. Do it right. I'm not going to have to pull this part out because I can change the axles without pulling the housing out of the chassis. All right. Just a wee bit of Loctite. There we go. Looks like we've actually had a decent number of people actually check in, stop in and actually, watch a few minutes of the video. Hopefully it's just that they were too bored, not that they didn't like me, that they didn't stick around. A little bit of a cinch on there. Now we'll do the other side. We're just about done other than the steering. That'll be the only outlier. Like I said, I'll have to find a link that'll work for that. Again, move my spacers so that they pinch the shock rod end. Put a touch of Loctite on there. All right, so real question here. Hopefully somebody can give me an answer. Would this be more entertaining if I made my wife sit in and hang out? Or no, more importantly, would you comment more on the chat if I made my wife sit in to read the comments? No? Yes? Maybe? Will anybody watch this far enough to make a comment about that? I've thought about it. But until there's actually, a fair bit of discussion over anything in the comments, there's no point in having someone that'll read the comments. Oh yeah, that's great. That's great. So now, there we go. If I take this, and granted it's upside down right now, but I can go all the way up into the chassis. Oh man, that bumper mount gets in the way. But nothing binds up. I don't hit the servo horn anymore. The only thing that I need to switch out is to a bent rod end or an offset rod end, not a bent, an offset rod end for the Panhard mount. And then this axle will have more up travel and clearance over everything without any binding on the steering or on the transmission. So this is well worth it. I wonder if that SSD will fit back here. If it will, we may just Loctite them in and call it good. Watch, the SSD is going to be too long for the back. We'll have to modify it no matter what. Yep, no, it's too long. Too long. Actually, yeah, it's too long. So I need to modify this SSD drive shaft to actually fit in this chassis. It's too long now that we corrected the drive shaft angle. And I'm probably going to replace the front drive shaft, but we'll leave it in for now. It'll keep the truck from rolling around on the shelf. At this point, we mount the wheels back up. Oh, got really confused there for a second. I didn't know where the wheel nut came from. I didn't remember putting it on there. That's because it's a new housing. It came with wheel nuts. Didn't even notice. One thing that I don't care for, I haven't found a good solution for yet, is these Yota axles. The stub shaft coming out is too short to actually fully seat a flanged hex nut with SSD wheels. Other wheels might work, but with SSD wheels, the flanged nylock hex nut does not seat all the way down into the nylock, and then they come loose and fall off while you're out on the trail. So you're stuck using non-flanged hex nuts, which ultimately cause additional wear and tear on the wheel, but a little bit of little extra rubbing on the wheel from the non-flanged hex nut is better than the wheel falling off on the trail. So I'll live with it. Eventually, I'm sure I will figure out a more appropriate solution to the problem. I've considered some different hex, thinner hexes to put on there. Yet to find one that I actually like the way it fits. But time will tell. There we go. Cross-eyed, but complete. The second chassis, complete with driver side differential on a TF2 chassis. That's a Yota II axle, differential on the driver's side. You can see how much better the drive shaft angle is. If I had a good way to cut to the beginning of the clip or beginning of this video where I showed the drive shaft angle coming across from over here to over here, then you'd really be able to see side by side how much of a difference this makes for the drive shaft angle. It makes the U-joint angles better. The overall the performance of the axle is going to be better. Now, the real question I know somebody's going to ask, because I didn't touch the rear end at all. I flipped the front end all around, but I didn't touch the rear end at all, is does everything rotate the same way? And then you're going to go, oh, well, you left the drive shaft out, so you could be lying, right? All right, that's true. So instead of showing you that it all rotates the same on this one, let me grab the K5 again, because that has two drive shafts in it. Two drive shafts with the same axle flip. The only difference is the leaf springs. There we go. Drive shaft 1, drive shaft 2. If I turn 1, all the wheels are turning. You can see them popping in the video. You can even see they're going the same way, only turning one drive shaft. So there you have it. It works. Flipping the differential in the front end. Again, same thing. That's a driver side diff. Same drive shaft angle as the other chassis now. Driver side diff. The rear differential, so that we can compare the this one. Make sure I'm not lying. There we go. Side by side. You can see the diff covers on the rear are exactly the same position. The step, the size, everything identical. This one's on links, this is on leafs. That's your only difference. So it works. You can flip it all around. You can have that driver side diff, clean up that drive line angle, clearance that servo so that servo horn clears. Your drive shaft doesn't bind on your transmission. All around, it should be a huge performance upgrade. It'll also allow you to get the chassis weight down a little bit lower because you can gain a little bit more up travel. You get the chassis down lower. That's going to lower your CG, improve your stability. Side hilling will work better. I mean, it just all around, it's going to make the truck work better having a proper drive shaft angle. So that's huge. Hopefully this helps somebody out. Hopefully if you've got a Marlin, a Midnight Crawler Edition, TF2, a Galant, something, any of these trucks that's got this type of setup in it, try it out. The Yota II axle, if you don't have a Yota II and you need to get one because you've got a Yota 1 axle still, the axle's $73, I think. I think it's like $73. So that's not too bad. The diff covers a little bit pricey for what it is. It's $24, but it looks super cool. And I mean, that's it. All your other parts bolt across, other than that steering link. If I can find the steering link, I'll add a link to the description of the video afterwards as to the factory style steering link. I'm sure that link can be bought from RC 4-wheel drive or a supplier of, or one of their vendors. I'm sure you could make your own. There's ways to do it. I don't have a good way to bend aluminum yet, so I don't know that I don't know if I'm going to be able to make one myself that'll actually be a nice link for that. But I might try. I mean, I've got a template to go off of in this truck as to what the goal is. But yeah, so that link, the diff cover, and an axle if you need a Yota II axle. The CVD style axles for it, I do recommend that. If you're doing the swap, I do recommend those. I don't remember how much they are. They can't be more than like $35, give or take a few. Worthwhile. You can run the dog bones until they break, but you will break them. The dog bones just suck. That's really all there is to it. Yeah. So I appreciate all those who tuned in. Hit that like, subscribe if you enjoyed it. Next week we'll be working on the 1K giveaway truck. I mean, it's still a long ways from us giving it away. We're only at 350 something subscribers, but when we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'm giving that truck away, and it's not going to be some heap of junk like it started out as. I mean, it started out as a ship box of parts, and we're going to turn it into something really nice. I've got big plans for it. I've already got some nice brand new parts for it that we're going to put on it next weekend. And I'm starting to visualize what I want the chassis to be. I haven't dialed in on the body yet. Got a few ideas, but it's going to be a hard body build. It's going to be a nice rig. I'm only going to put decently good or better parts on it. So we're not doing no bang good parts or Chinesium stuff. We're doing I'm going to do some nice stuff with it. I won't say that it's going to be, a full Vanquish built rig. Otherwise I just go buy a VS410 type truck and build it and give it away. But I want it to be a custom one-off set of parts to build. So that's what it's going to be. And we're going to give it away. And I hope I can give it away, if all goes well. I think in 4 to 5 months would be a great time to give it away, which would be, let's see, it's May now. So that's, if I could give that truck away in November as a complete RTR, that would be pretty awesome. November would be awesome to do that as a giveaway, because that's when I get older in November. So to celebrate giving someone a badass truck for helping make my channel great, that would be awesome. We'll see. That's still a long ways away. Like I said, we're at 350 subscribers. So if things don't really take off, then we're who knows? It could be next year. It could sit on my shelf for a long time, but hopefully not. Hopefully we can give it away. I think that's it for tonight. I hope the information that I have provided or shared on doing this axle flip has been useful. I hope someone else is able to take notes from that. The leaf under blocks that I did on this truck are a 3D printed part that I did up. I'm going to add those onto my Colts 3D STL site. Those I'm going to do for free. I have other STLs on there that are for sale, but these are just a really small, simple block. I just have, I mean, it took me only a couple of minutes and my calipers to whip those up. So I'll put those on there for free. If somebody was looking for leaf under blocks, they work on Yota 2s and K44s. They don't work on Yota 1s, but they work on Yota 2 and K44 axles to go leaf under if you're looking for that real scale look and trying to get everything down a little bit more. Excuse me. Until next time, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you. Oh, don't forget to watch my video from yesterday that I posted earlier today of me and the wife out with our TF2s, enjoying some trail time, and we'll see you next Sunday on next Sunday's live stream. Thanks, guys. Later.